Thanks, Claire.
No worries. All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our event today, our Evidence to Action or the Impact of Investing in Research Co-Design event. My name's Claire Gibellini. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm actually the chair of the National Disability Research Partnership, which sounds really fancy, but actually all of the hard work is done by the amazing team at the NDRP. Before we begin, I'd really like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we are all joining today on throughout Australia. The people whose land we live and work and have lived on and cared for country for thousands of generations. And I want to also acknowledge that this land has never been ceded. We pay our respects to them, their cultures, and to elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge First Nations people with disability and the knowledge and the leadership and the community authority they bring to disability research. I'm very fortunate. I live on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation over here in Boorloo or Perth, and I feel very privileged to do so. So again, thank you so much for joining us. This is a really important day for us, and it's an important point in the NDRP's first round of research funding. You may already know, but in 2025, the NDRP funded 15 projects focused on the safety of people with disability. 13 teams were funded to co-design future research, and 2 teams were funded to co-design and analyse existing evidence on the priority safety issues. So today, I'm very, very excited to officially launch the report titled The Impact of Investing in Research Co-Design that was written for the NDRP by Dr Ellen Skladzien. This report brings together what was learned across those 15 projects. Importantly, it looks beyond the individual project topics to ask what happened when we invested in co-design before the next stage of research began. So today gives us the opportunity to hear about those findings, to hear directly from the funded teams, and to think together about what that might mean for how disability research should be funded and supported into the future. Before I introduce Ellen, though, I just want to go through a few practical points. The event's being recorded. Approved recordings and materials will be shared after the event. If you don't want your image to appear in the recording, you can keep your camera off. Professional captions and Auslan interpretation are available. You can use the external captions link to make them larger, and you can separate the interpretation channel from your Zoom screen to make it larger. Please let the team know in the chat if you're having any issues. You can use the chat or the Q&A to share a question or a reflection. There's a number of us here today, so we may not get to every question today, but we'll capture questions for the follow-up. Please always participate in a way that works for you. You are most welcome to move around, to step away, to take an additional break, or keep your camera off at any time. And lastly, a content note. Some presentations today might discuss violence, abuse, neglect, restrictive practices, justice, sexual or reproductive safety, family violence, and other experiences that might be distressing. So please make the choices that you need to make about whether or not and how you participate. So it is now my immense pleasure to introduce Dr. Ellen Skladzien, who is the author of our report, The Impact of Investing in Research Co-Design. Over to you, Ellen.
Thank you, Claire. Really happy to be here today. For those who don't know me, as you said, I'm an independent consultant. I work in the disability sector, but I have a long history with the sector. I previously was CEO of Down Syndrome Australia, and have worked with lots of different organizations in the sector. I do want to start out by apologizing a little bit because my voice is very croaky. I've been suffering from a bad cold over the weekend, so I will try and speak up as much as possible, but I apologize for that. So I was really excited to have this opportunity to do this review of the seed funding round. And as Claire talked about, my role was to look across all of the projects and see what we could learn collectively about what happens when we invest in co-design early. One of the things that really struck me from the start was just how genuine the co-design was. I think all of us will have had the experience lately of co-design being used in many spaces and places in ways that doesn't really resonate with us and doesn't really fit with what real co-design is. And that wasn't the case with these projects. We really saw true, genuine co-design. And what came out of the report that I've written is really just a really strong demonstration of what is possible when you take the time um, and the funding to really invest in co-design. So in this slide, what I've tried to do is to show that the NDRP took a different approach to funding co-design. So the usual research, the common approach to research funding is that researchers are asked to do the design, come up with a proposal, put it into the funding organization, get the funding, and then maybe do co-design at the end. The problem with that approach is that a lot of the big decisions have already been made. So researchers have already had to decide what the question is, how to do the work. And what NDRP did was to do it quite differently. So they funded co-design at the start, which meant that people had the time and money to really listen to people with disability, work together as a team, and then make those big decisions and answer those big questions. So it was a really different approach to how things have been done in the past. And so what we wanted to do is to ask the question, what happens when you do this? And if we can go to the next slide, please. So what we found was that co-design changed the research. So, and I love this quote that's on the slide. When people with lived experience had real authority, decisions changed in meaningful ways. And we saw this across all the different projects. For example, the aged care project had been thinking about safety in terms of the policies, both formal and informal policies that were in place. And after the co-design work happened, they changed the approach and really looked at people's understanding of their rights and how that worked. We also saw the methods change, so the way people were going about doing the research, and even how people were defining safety. And I think that's the really powerful demonstration of why investing in co-design matters, because it changed when you listen to people with disability and you work as a team, it changes the way the research is going to be done. If you can go to the next slide, please. This round was also about capability. And I also love this quote. So, being part of this research team is the first time I felt like I had a voice. So, for people with disability, we saw that this round gave them opportunities to build their skills, their confidence, get new experience in research. People took on really significant roles. They were involved in developing questions, doing interviews, analyzing the findings. But it wasn't just people with disability who benefited. Researchers also developed new skills and changed the way they practiced, changed the way they thought about things. There was also really significant changes to partnerships. So people working together in new ways, developing trust and relationships. And one of the exciting things is that all of these things that happened with these projects, it's not just a moment in time. These will carry forward and continue to have impacts over time. If we can go to the next slide, please. I think one of the things that the projects has shown us is that none of this happens just simply because we call something co-design. And again, this lovely quote says it better than I can. Co-designing research, particularly on sensitive and complex topics, takes time, trust, resources, and really good partnerships with diverse stakeholders. So although the projects worked across different topics and different communities, there was a number of common themes that came out about what needed to happen to make co-design work well. I tried to group those into three main areas. So one was around leadership. So giving people with disability a chance to be true leaders in the research. Sharing power. It's also about safety. So the research was about safety, but there was also an importance of safety within how co-design happened. Part of that was about building trust. And we heard in different projects about people who've had bad experience with research before and came into the projects thinking they weren't really going to be listened to, and the work that had to happen to make them feel safe to participate. Also, needing to have cultural safety and psychosocial safety within how the projects work themselves. This was particularly important because the projects were dealing with such sensitive topics and working with communities that in some cases haven't been served well by research in the past. And the third area was resources. So co-design can't happen if you don't invest in it. Building relationships and trust takes time. Making information accessible takes resources. And supporting different communication needs time as well. I'm just gonna stop for a second and say that I apologize. I'm not going to be able to kind of keep track of the comments in the chat, and I don't know if there's anyone, if anything significant comes up that I need to respond to. If the NDRP team can let me know, because thank you. So I think this brings to us some really important lessons for funders. If we want meaningful co-design, these conditions, they need to be funded as part of the research process, and they need to be seen as equally important to all of the other costs involved in research. If we can go to the next slide, please. The projects also highlighted some of the structural challenges to doing this co-design well. One of them is funding. So it wasn't the case for these projects, but many of the teams told us that this was really unique, that they hadn't been able to do this kind of work before because co-design usually starts too late. Usually there isn't the funding to do this early. So one of the lessons was really the importance of having this kind of funding available to do co-design early. We also heard about systems that create barriers. So employment was an example of this, where in some university systems, it was really difficult to employ a researcher with disability, particularly people with intellectual disability. And that might range from challenges around recruitment or HR, or even, as I'm sure many of you have experienced, the challenges of working within the IT systems of a university. It's not easy for anyone. We also learned about some of the structural challenges around data and evidence. We found that in some cases, really important information hasn't been collected, things that we need to know. And in other cases, we heard about there being the evidence, but that evidence not being used in the way that it needed to be. So one of the lessons from here is that if we want disability-led research, some of the systems around how research is funded or how research happens needs to change as well. We can go to the next slide, please. So I've tried to capture the very long report into 4 main takeaway lessons. So first of all, funding co-design early. So this round has given us a really great demonstration of why funding co-design early really matters. When people with disability and communities were involved before the research questions were decided, the research changed. The second one is creating the right conditions. So co-design depends on leadership, depends on safety, depends on actually having the time and resources to do it. Investing in capability and partnerships. I think the value of this funding round isn't just in the proposals that were developed. It supported people to develop research experience and skills. It's changed the way researchers worked, and it strengthened relationships. And this round has really shown us the value of that. And lastly, but importantly, it's also shown the need to change some of the ways that the systems around research work in order to make true co-design and genuinely disability-led research work well. And I have to say, it was so interesting working on this, because when I first thought about how do you look at projects that were designing research proposals and say what the impact is, I thought, oh, this is going to be really hard because the research hasn't happened yet. And I do still think it's going to be fascinating if in 5 years' time we can look back and follow where each of these teams has gone and brought their research. But it was really exciting to see how much had actually happened within the process of developing those proposals. And the value of this investment wasn't just in those proposals it produced, but also in the relationships it built. But it also just is an amazing demonstration of a different way of developing disability research. So on that note, I think I will finish. But I do want to thank the NDRP and all of the research teams who are here today for letting me be part of this process. And also thank you for bearing with me, and especially with being a little bit unwell today. So thank you so much. And back to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Ellen. And I really appreciate your work. And I will also say that the cranky little advocate in me thinks that we now have some great evidence for when people tell us that this can't be done, because now we know it can. One of the things that comes through strongly in that report is that the value of the investment, we can't reduce it to the 15 individual project outputs. Like you said, it's also about what changed in the approach to designing research, the capability and the partnerships that were built, and what those projects also tell us about the systems surrounding disability research. And I wanted to just highlight what Ruth has said in the chat around, making sure that we capture the other costs that you might not necessarily see. So things like IT and HR systems, when there's those barriers, how do we make sure that that cost of those things doesn't become a further barrier too? So today we're going to spend the rest of our time together actually hearing directly from the teams and exploring some of these lessons in much more depth. I am very, very excited to hand over to our wonderful CEO, Mary Sayers. She is the Chief Executive Officer of NDRP and a great, wonderful champion of true inclusive design, as are many of the rest of our team, or all of the rest of our team, I should say. Can you tell that I'm slightly proud of them all? Mary's going to set the scene for the day and explain how all of the team's showcases will work. So over to you, Mary.
Mary speaking. Thank you very much, and thank you, Claire, and thank you, Ellen, for all your work. As Claire mentioned, my name is Mary Sayers, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm lucky enough to be the CEO of the National Disability Research Partnership, coming to you from Bunurong lands, which always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So Ellen's given us a view across the whole investment in seed funding. But for the next part of the day, we want to bring those findings to life through the experiences of the funded teams themselves. Just some accessibility updates if you joined us late. We have Auslan interpretation. There should be an interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom screen that you can click on. If you're not seeing that, go to more and then you should find the interpretation screen. And we also have captions as well. So as many of you know, the NDRP funds research which is led by and with people with disability. And our aim is not just to produce more research, is to support research that's relevant to the priorities of people with disability, and therefore that will have a stronger chance of influencing policy, practice and community action. The 2025 funding round was deliberately unusual in one important respects. For most projects, as Alan said, we invested before the research design was locked in. This gave teams the space to work with people with disability and other partners to test assumptions, change questions, identify different priorities, and work out what the next stage of research should be actually looking like, so that they're in the best position to secure funding either from the NDRP or another research funder. So this slide shows the way we think about research and systems change. Sometimes the evidence already exists and recommendations have already been made, but there's an implementation gap. We know more than we are doing. Sometimes there's an accountability gap. We do not yet know whether commitments are translating into better outcomes. And sometimes there's a genuine evidence gap that creates a new research opportunity. That matters for co-design. If people with disability and community organisations and researchers are all working together early, they can help identify which problem we actually have. Is it an issue that we need new evidence or that existing evidence is not being used? Is the question framed in the right way? Are we looking at the part of the system where change can happen? So, research is more likely to be useful for decision makers when it helps to explain what is happening and why, addresses real policy change or serves challenges, connects with current reforms and responsibilities, and is clear about what the findings mean in policy and practice. It also helps when research looks beyond the findings itself to implementation. Who has responsibility for implementation? Where different levels of government need to work together? What barriers may get in the way? What costs or feasibility issues are there? And what decision the evidence could inform? So co-design strengthens this because it brings in knowledge about how systems are actually experienced by people on the ground. It can expose assumptions, identify harms or things that we can't see easily, and makes the research question more relevant before time and money are committed to funding the research. And today is about seeing what is meant in practice. As you listen to the team showcases, I encourage you to keep 4 questions in mind. What changed because people with disability were involved before the research began? What conditions made meaningful co-design possible? What barriers in the wider research or funding systems did teams encounter? And what will last beyond the current funded project, whether that is a partnership, capability, a clearer research direction, or an opportunity for action? We don't we do not expect the answers to look the same across all projects or every project. And one of the important messages from this work is that there is no single template for good co-design. Different communities, topics, and relationships require different approaches. What matters today is looking for patterns. What helped? What got in the way? What changed because of the investment? And what should we carry forward?